Huawei, the most evil business in the world. A company called Huawei has run into problems due to technology-related issues worldwide. What will happen to Huawei phones in the future if Huawei's business is bad? Huawei is probably unknown to you, and if you see it marketed, you'll likely think it's just another sizable corporation like Samsung or Apple. In contrast, Huawei has surpassed Apple and Samsung to become the largest telecom firm in the world in the span of just a few short years, proving that this couldn't be further from the truth. One of the most terrible corporations in the world and one of the biggest threats to our society is Huawei. The business just surpassed Apple as the second largest smartphone marketer in the world, producing more than $100 billion annually thanks to its inexpensive, trustworthy, and well-built phones. However, when you look at this more, you question how this is possible. Despite the fierce competition in the mobile phone industry and the saturation of the telecoms market, Huawei has managed to dominate the market. Although Huawei may not come to mind when discussing smartphones, that doesn't imply the company isn't significant. In actuality, Huawei is enormous, particularly in the telecommunications sector. It is the world's biggest supplier of telecom equipment and a pioneer of fifth-generation 5G technology. It even overtook Apple to overtake it as the second-largest smartphone vendor globally. However, many think the organization is still mysterious, especially in the West. Additionally, there is suspicion in the United States. With data centers and other tech initiatives from companies obedient to the CCP, activities are frequently around the US but only sometimes visible. For background, Huawei runs all of the cellular networks in Africa, which account for around 70% of the total. Even the other Chinese mobile service providers like CTE and China Telecom that provide services in Africa are separate from this. This massive data collection by China isn't just theoretical. The nation actually engages in it, and any information must be delivered immediately at the government's request. Washington has been apprehensive for years that Huawei technology could be used by the Chinese government to spy on other nations. The U.S. administration is concerned that Huawei could compromise national security since it is unable to oppose the Chinese government. Huawei denied Washington's suspicions that it was spying on other nations. They've stated that they will turn down any demands from the Chinese government for access to equipment that has been provided. However, the Trump administration placed the corporation on a list of foreign businesses prohibited from doing business in the United States in May 2019. To defend America from foreign enemies who are actively and increasingly constructing and exploiting vulnerabilities in information and communications technology infrastructure and services in the United States, the White House stated that the president was taking action. At first, Trump's blanket ban on Huawei and the U.S. government's attempt to impose a similar ban were just empty diplomatic gestures. Still, when Canadian police detained Meng Wanzhou, the so-called Princess of Hawaii, the conflict became much more serious because it was allegedly planned that Huawei's CFO would provide Hawaii tech to the Iranian government. Even though they were subject to international sanctions, China quickly reacted by imprisoning two American businesspeople, notwithstanding their denials that they had anything to do with the Vancouver arrest of the Huawei CFO. We know that the two guys were taken into custody based on what they call suspicions that they were involved in actions that endangered China's national security. After 2 years of dead-on transit across the Pacific Ocean and a long judicial battle in which she acknowledged the crimes but was not prosecuted, Meng was finally freed from custody. This hostage diplomacy from the Cold War era demonstrates how much the U.S. administration fears Hawaii and the authority they have allowed China, even if the standoff ended in a peaceful compromise. What's worse is that it also shows how little they can change the situation even when they try. The next day, China released its two hostages. This demonstrates that diplomacy and sanctions don't help stop the issue with Hawaii's influence. Even outright bans on Hawaii haven't stopped it. It's like cancer metastasizing. When the UK government attempted to address Hawaii, they discovered that it was nearly impossible to remove the sponge from them. The West was too late to react to Huawei the way it hasn't to past Chinese expansions, since Huawei is simply one part of China's expanding control network. The Trump administration lifted the ban a month later. However, this wasn't the first time that the company had been accused of wrongdoing. In August of the same year, it became public that Huawei had worked with at least 2 African governments to spy on political rivals. For instance, there are allegations that Huawei staff members assisted Zambian officials in accessing the Facebook pages and phones of bloggers who opposed the country's president, Edgar Lungu. The technicians even followed the bloggers' movements, which resulted in their detentions in the first several months of 2019. However, there still needs to be evidence that Huawei's Chinese executives were aware of these projects. Huawei needs to keep up with management training improvements. They should change how they teach managers if they want to expand internationally. This militarized attitude they have fostered in China will not be welcomed by other nations or labor. This contributed to their lack of success in the United States. They should keep employing consultants to research Western business concepts and emphasize Western and non-Western management techniques. They will become more adaptable and successful globally as a result.